Biden family might have accepted over $40 million in payments from foreign nationals in exchange for, quote, favorable policy decisions, House Oversight Committee Chair James Comer suggested on Wednesday.
Let's hear what Comer had to say about the situation on the Katz and Cosby podcast this week.
We have 6 specific policy decisions, 4 of which were made while Joe Biden was president early on, that we can't come to any other conclusion as to why these decisions were made other than the fact that this president is compromised. This was organized crime. There's no other.
President Biden has denied any involvement with his son Hunter Biden's business dealings.
So I think this is an interesting situation where the man, James Comer, who is chair of the House Oversight Committee, who has access to the evidence that they're getting in, who now is saying in the last 5 days that the panel has obtained these banking statements and suspicious activity, and reports show that there are bank accounts and shell companies and more linking to the Bidens. And they did say, the whistleblower, that it would take a long time, and it was said by the folks at Burisma, to actually trace all of these payments. And it seems to me that that's what the House Oversight Committee has been doing. So it's interesting to me that Comer is still not using absolute language. If you have the evidence, why are you saying may or might? That's what I don't get.
Yeah, it seems like they have a lot of circumstantial evidence, but they don't have the smoking gun just yet. They have this WhatsApp message from Hunter Biden in 2017 to a Chinese official saying, my father is sitting right here with me. Are you going to hold up your end of the deal, essentially? But of course, they can't prove that Joe Biden was actually sitting next to Hunter Biden or knew about the message at that time. And they also have all of these references to the big guy receiving 10%, et cetera. And they think that Joe Biden is the big guy, but they don't really know yet. And I'm kind of getting shades at this point of the Russian collusion investigation, where Adam Schiff was constantly speculating on cable news and trying to say that he had seen irrefutable evidence that then President Donald Trump had colluded with Russia in order to win the presidency. And so I hope that soon, I know some of this stuff is classified, that Comer comes with the goods and actually shows the proof behind all of this, because each thread that we're tugging at seems really promising, but I just can never trust the politicians to actually see these investigations through and give us the concrete proof.
Yeah, and the FBI, who should have investigated this at the point they got the whistleblower claim, and it seems that they stopped at the point where they realized they wouldn't be able to trace this financial record of these payments going from Burisma over to the Bidens. But in the last 5 days, the House Oversight Committee was able to either hire investigators or have people on staff who are able to trace these payments, so much so that they've increased the figure fourfold. It went from $10 million, 5 to Hunter Biden, 5 to Joe Biden, to now $40 million to the Bidens. And for him to say, you know, the money went through shell companies and overseas accounts, et cetera, it sounds to me that they have some kind of paper trail that can trace this money from Burisma to the Bidens. Now, if that is the case, I would hope he would be speaking in more absolute terms. But for him to say the Biden's family may have accepted in excess of $40 million, just say the figure you're sure of at this point in time. That's what's really throwing me. But I think the Democrats not being transparent about what's going on in this House Oversight Committee and not wanting these records to be public, I think is probably hurting them. Because if they wanted this to be public, they could counteract what James Comer is saying in the press, saying we actually don't have that evidence yet. Here is what we do have. And so now we have one voice in the media telling this story, and it's a really unfavorable one for Biden. And I think he's having a hard time answering for it because of that as well. I think it's actually hurting his chance to win his reelection for the presidency, which is something a lot of the Democrats want.
Yeah, I definitely find the IRS whistleblowers' claims a lot more easily believable than those from James Comer, just because this is a guy who went through the proper whistleblower process. He did everything that he was supposed to do. He waited until the charges were filed against Hunter Biden to come forward with his claims that the investigation was rigged. And he has some bombshell claims in there. He says that the FBI basically would stop the investigation whenever they started to get close to the president, to Joe Biden Biden himself or whenever his name would come up. He says that they slow walked it so that it would not reach a charging point until after the 2020 election. He says that the state's attorney in Delaware was discouraged by the DOJ from filing the charges in other states in which they might have been able to get Hunter Biden on more serious crimes, and instead were basically cajoled into giving him this sweetheart plea deal. So these are very serious allegations of an actual cover-up on behalf of the FBI and the DOJ, who was supposed to be investigating this. And it suggests that they didn't just do a poor job of handling the investigation, but perhaps they were actively trying to push it in another direction, away from President Joe Biden.
I think this is a situation where if Joe Biden were to not win re-election, or whenever he is no longer president, we need to have a hearing in Congress. I'm reminded of the last influx point in history, which would be the Iran-Contra scandal, where we had members of Congress and the foreign policy establishment decide to fund the Contras, the right-wing group in Nicaragua, in their fight against the Sandinistas, which had just come to power, a democratic socialist group. And Reagan had promised, this was at a point in time where the American people were really fed up with U.S. meddling in foreign countries' political affairs and all of the coups we were doing via the CIA and other groups, the U.S. military involved as well. And he promised that we wouldn't get involved. Congress voted unanimously that we would not get involved in Nicaragua, and still we sold weapons to Iran, and Iran sold those weapons to the Contras. And we had a hearing afterwards when it was apparent that they were acting out of their own personal interests and not in the interests of the American people that they're supposed to represent and promise to represent, in the opposite direction of their actions. And so this is a similar situation. It reminds me of Bud McFarland on the floor of Congress saying, I bet you're all wondering or thinking that the way we do foreign policy in this country is very wrong, but you just don't know how wrong. It really seems that it's not surprising to me that heads of state would do precisely what Biden is accused of doing. I think for a long time, our heads of state and those in the foreign policy establishment have had ties to multinational corporations and have used their power in this country to accumulate more wealth through those relations with those corporations. And so this could be a point in time where we actually have a hearing and something comes of it. So we establish some anti-corruption measures in this country. We really need a public hearing about something of this nature.
Yeah, at the very least, I would hope, because the Biden family, outside of Joe Biden himself, although he made a pretty big gaffe the other week about how he accepted money for policy or something to that effect. At least I hope it was a gaffe and not him admitting the truth. But members of his family, including his brothers, have made quite clear that they have no problem with using the Biden name and the perception that they are close to power to make tons of money. So it wouldn't be surprising if these Comer allegations turn out to be true. I just want to see more evidence. I always want to see more evidence. But I don't think it can stop at just a hearing, because we had a hearing in which James Clapper lied about whether or not the government was spying on Americans. And we turned out that they were not only spying on Americans, but they were doing it in a really aggressive and widespread fashion. And somehow, instead of being held accountable for that, he now has a well-paying gig on cable television to provide analysis about law enforcement. So hopefully, if these allegations do turn out to be true, we can have a little bit more accountability than just making the evidence public. We have to leave it there. We'll be back with more Rising.